Right, so we're going to start off looking at the guard and also kind of some basic footworks. So I'm going to take my earpiece out, which means that if anyone has any questions, I won't be able to hear you until I put it back in. But there will be time for questions at the end, so just kind of hold your horses, so to speak. Right, so the point where we're going to start off is we're actually going to start off talking about the weapon, which is the fist, and talking about how to make a fist. Because one thing that like not everyone necessarily knows how to do is make one, so we're going to start. So to make a fist, just start with your hand nice and loose, nice and relaxed, and you start curling your fingers up and folding them down, and then just letting them relax so that they're loosely touching the palm of your hand. You want your fingertips to be touching the palm of your hand. You don't want them to be like dead death grip tight, because that will tire you out and slow your movement. So you've got basically this kind of position, and then you take your thumb and you pull your thumb as far back as you can so that it's sitting really on sort of this line of knuckles. You don't want to clip your thumb. In fact, one of the worst injuries I've seen during martial arts was doing taekwondo, where a person had a habit of flaring their thumb until it got caught in someone's pants as they were blocking a kick. Then they screamed very loudly, needed to go to hospital, and every winter experienced pain in their thumb for, well, as long as I knew them. All right, so this is your basic fist. You make these both hands, because in boxing, you have two weapons, namely the fists. And then to come on guard, it's kind of similar to a fencing guard, except you start with your non-dominant foot forward. So I know it's kind of in vogue right now to be a right-handed southpaw. For the purposes of this system, I don't recommend it. What I recommend you do is keep your dominant hand back, because a lot of the ways that you line up your distance and line up your angles is using your dominant hand. The front hand is more incidental, is a secondary weapon that gets used more than the primary weapon, if that makes sense. But so what you do is start with your dominant side back. In this case, it's my right side because I'm nominally right-handed. You start with your feet in an L, much like we did when we're doing all of our sword systems and our knife system. You bend your knees to a nice comfortable bend and move back to about 2 foot widths apart. You can be a little bit have a slightly deeper stance if you like. I would not recommend having a narrower, higher stance in boxing, because you're very liable to get knocked over doing that. So 2 foot widths is good. Nice supple bend in your knees, so you should be able to bounce a bit. And for your hands, your dominant hand, your power hand, as I'm going to call it, basically bends at a little under 90 degrees and sits right across your solar plexus. So your upper arm is hanging downwards, and then your forearm comes and covers what they call the mark, which is your solar plexus. And if you've ever been hit in the solar plexus, it's really, really not fun. Your front arm comes on guard in a very, very similar guard position to what we've seen with, saber, foil, knife, all of those weapons, bent at about 90 degrees, forearm probably just a bit above vertical. So to see it from the front, looks like that. And this is your guard, with one exception. Your hands don't sit still, they rotate. So this is very stereotypical of this period of boxing, is, people, rotating their hands. You see it kind of played for laughs in a lot of media, but this is actually a very important tactic. Because I only have my fists, I don't have like a big glove or anything. I can't cover myself fully. I need to keep my hands moving, because if my hands are moving in this kind of manner, it means I'm effectively covering all the way from here to here, because my opponent doesn't necessarily know where my hands will be. And same with the back. I know a lot of modern boxers like to keep their hand up here, and Monster actually his guard actually holds his hand across his chest like this, rather than down. But with this rotating motion, I can basically move between this kind of high guard where I'm protecting my face and this low guard where I'm protecting my solar plexus. Because one of the things about one of the things about bare knuckle boxing and also boxing with the older style like horsehair gloves is that body blows become a lot more dangerous. So in modern boxing, a lot of modern boxers will go the body to then open up the head, whereas in bare knuckle and traditional pugilism, you know, it's more common to go the head to open up the body. So you want to kind of keep your hands moving because you're wanting to protect both your head and your body. You can't wear shots in this necessarily as easily, although by the same token, you also can't. By the same token, a lot of boxers in this period fought for insanely long periods. Rounds were as many rounds as there needed to be for a fight. And so you hear stories of matches going for 10, 20, sometimes these long sort of hour-long kind of matches where people just sort of slug it out. Although their fitness would have to be considerably better than mine for them to not lose all their power after, 20, 30 minutes of boxing, to be honest. Which, given that often also drinks some rum between rounds, might be the case. Anyway, so what I want you to practice doing once you've kind of got to your stance and you're starting to rotate is I want you to get into the habit of rocking with your feet to rotate. So this is something a drill from Monster talks about, where he says what you should do is basically march and you rotate your hands so that when you rotate your front arm and rotate your front leg and get used to just stepping like that. So let's just practice that a bit. So just rotating your front arm, leave your back arm aligned, and just raising your foot so that it's going just in a kind of normal motion. And the step is not big. I mean, I'm exaggerating a bit for sight, but if all you're doing is lifting your heel off the ground completely, that's more than okay. You want to basically, you just get a little bit of sway, a little bit of movement to keep in. So just start by doing this. All right, so assuming you've got the hang of that, let's work on the other side. So same idea, just gently moving back and forth and tapping your foot on the ground. You'll notice I'm rocking forward. Your weight kind of sits somewhere between mid and front weighted in this system. You don't necessarily want to be back weighted because pulling back is kind of the primary form of head movement that you see in these kinds of systems. But yeah, just kind of gently lifting your foot sort of up and down. And now let's bring it all together. So I want you to just bring those motions together. And it's really, really still to try and do it as smoothly as possible. And what you'll find is just you get this very, very kind of gentle movement. And it also affects your body. Like you notice how you can tell that I'm coming forward and back. But this is actually quite important because it actually disguises when I'm going to attack. So one of the things about moving my hands like this is you can't quite tell what is me extending to throw a punch and what is me just cycling my hands, I'm cycling my hand. And a punch can very, very quickly come out of nowhere. So this is kind of a very useful skill to have in terms of just keeping your opponent off guard. And also because you're swaying and moving, particularly if you're moving your body, you can, I'll show you this from the side, you can just gently move back and forth. And then as you lean back, you can even back weight and bring your front foot forward to then pull yourself rapidly forward to switch direction to create kind of little distance traps for your opponent. So this kind of movement, I know a lot of people think it looks funny, and you do when you see it depicted in media. It's kind of often depicted as a comedic thing, but no, it is actually a very, very important and useful skill of boxing. And as someone who tends to prefer or was boxing later periods of 1920s, 1930s era boxing for a while, when I sort of first got into historical boxing, when I first had someone do this to me properly, like someone and rotating their hands, it was actually really, really deceptive and really difficult to deal with. So very worthwhile thing to do. All right, so that is the basics of our stance. It's a little bit more complicated than, the saber or epee or knife stance. but yeah, not that much so. So before we move on, are there any questions?
Are you able to hear? Oh,
A big
that
one, so
came
you.
through. I'm going to use my headset.
Fair enough.
All right, are you able to hear me?
I'm able to hear you.
Yep, great. How much rotation in the rib cage and pelvis should there be? Like, should it be at the extreme of very front on, or at the extreme of very side on? Like, where should that be kind of lying?
So in terms of rotation, I'm gonna have to take my earpiece
Is
out.
that something that's specified?
Um, Not off the top of my head, although I mean the images. I'll see if I can find you. I'll see if we can find this with an image quickly. Um, yeah, I mean, if you look at sort of Elliot's guard, it does seem more front on, like about sort of more front on than let's see if we can find some of his other guards. Like you compare it to his foil guard. He is more facing forward, and I actually tried. Like I when I originally started doing these systems of boxing, I thought they were very side on. And then I started doing, and then that didn't work. So I did them very front on. That didn't work, and that kind of came to sort of a bit of a compromise. So it's not all the way back, but it's about 60% back. So you're kind of front on, but still with a bit of an angle. So if that makes sense.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you.
No problem. I'm kind of proud of myself. I got to use a source live, which is always fun.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. So, are there any questions? All right. So it sounds like we've just got the one. So I'm just going to pause recording before we move on, and I should be back in a moment.